evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Breakdown. It is June 22nd, 2025. I'm your host, Nate Pike. We have so much to talk about. It's been a couple weeks since we've done a live show, and it seems like that's always when the universe decides to just shovel everything that's going on in Alberta politics as quickly as we can. So we have a lot of ground to cover. A couple things I want to address right out of the gates first, before we get into the meat and the potatoes, if you will, of tonight's show. First of all, yes, it's true. I did, in fact, moderate, host, MC, I don't know what to call it, a town hall in Airdrie on healthcare. It was hosted by the NDP. You can find the live stream of it on their Facebook. I just want to be very, very clear, because I know that this is the kind of thing that certain partisan hacks like to jump on and say, oh, you see, he's part of a team. No. And in fact, one of the exercises I started the night with was by highlighting the fact that I am not a member of the NDP. I am not a member of any political party whatsoever currently. That's the first piece. Second piece, didn't get paid, didn't ask to get paid. Thought it would be a chance to have a really good discussion. And as it turns out, it really was. Got a little hot, a little spicy in a couple places, but it was a really fun exercise. And the other thing that I just wanted to clarify, I know for the record, I'm fairly confident that the UCP would never ask me to speak at or MC or moderate any of their events. That's a them thing. It's not a me thing. I would be happy to do that if it, as long as it wasn't in Lougheed, Calgary Lougheed, because that's where all of the Lougheed people, the UCP Lougheed people, that's where they'll go. And I don't want to have bad faith conversations. So there it is. It was just a fun thing to do. I like doing fun things. That's the first piece. The second piece is, I was unaware going into that town hall. And this came as a personal surprise to me. And I would like to take a second to discuss this with certainly the YouTube audience. I know I wear a hat pretty much always, but if somebody could have warned me that not getting a haircut for the better part of a year left me looking like a grunge version of Christopher Walken from The Prophecy, that would have been a good heads up to have. I wish somebody had communicated that. Nonetheless, I shrunk the head. It's smaller now. I got a haircut. But a wonderful man named Norm. It's all immaterial, because what we're here to talk about is the Alberta politics situation, and we have so much that we have to deal with tonight. And there are a couple pieces that we're not going to get too far into. We'll touch on the by-elections towards the end of the show. There's a couple other nuts and bolts that have been going on throughout the last little while, but we're not going to get crazy into those things, because there's all of this other stuff that hasn't gotten quite as much conversation. And, the FOIPS, let me tell you, we got like 3 really significant FOIPs. We're going to talk about 2 of them tonight. The third one, though, is like 900 pages. It's a lot. And so it's going to take a little while to sort through that. I'll just give you the little teaser. It's got a lot to do with the whole, as the NDP calls it, corrupt care scandal. So when we get back into that, you're going to want to make sure that you catch that. But let's start by talking about Danielle Smith's very bad day in Fort Macleod. Because for anybody who's unfamiliar, if you didn't catch any of the live streams, so worth it. Chef's kiss. The people of Fort Macleod and the surrounding area, they were invited to come to a little town hall, a little shindig that Danielle Smith was putting on, and talk about the coal situation. And it didn't go well.
I just want to start by saying that sometimes you get into government and you inherit problems that are many decades in the making. I can tell you that Brian Jean didn't create the problems. I can tell you Rebecca Schultz didn't create the problems. I can tell you R.J. Sigurdsson didn't create the problems. So when we came in, we had a multitude of coal companies that had launched a $14 billion lawsuit.
I don't care.
For canceling their leases. Now I know there's a lot of landowners in this room, and you know how I feel about property rights. I have been a property rights advocate since 1997, and that is why we changed our Bill of Rights to say that if anyone has their property taken from them for public use, they would get full, fair, and timely compensation. That applies just as much to surface landowners as it does to subsurface landowners. And so that's the situation we inherited. That is the problem my energy minister and my environment minister have been trying to solve. If we do nothing, then we're told we'll likely lose those cases and have to pay 14. $14 billion of payments. So what we're trying to do is to try to find a common ground, a way that certain projects can go ahead with a responsible, modernized policy using best practices, and where hopefully we can settle with some of the other companies to take those rights out of use so that those lands never get developed. That's the process we're in right now. And I suspect many of those proposed mines are not going to go ahead, and that those leases will be returned to the Crown for some future government to make a decision on. But we have to go through that process. However, we had I wasn't here, guys. Like, I'm brand new. I've just been 2.5 years
in. It's a long clip, I know, but so worth it. The ending. I'm brand new. It's not like I've been premier for 3 years or anything like that, or that a good portion of her government and cabinet are made up of people who were elected in the Jason Kenney era. No, it's not like that at all. Except, yes, it is. That's exactly what it is. But the spin and the attempted stick, as opposed to the carrot of, well, these coal companies, they've said they're going to sue us, and they've said that it's going to be for a lot of money. And I'm just terrified of what that could mean. So we have to roll over and find a way to compromise with them. And that in and of itself is a bit of a disingenuous argument, because here's the problem with that. If you're going to say, oh, there's these coal companies, let's say there's 9 of them. I'm making that number up. Let's say there's 9 of them. We're going to screw 6 of them. We're going to say to 6 of them that they can't develop, and we're going to say to 3 of them that they can. And that's a compromise. See, what we've done here is we've made sure that only 3 get to go ahead, and the 6 others. If you think that the 6 others are just going to then turn around and go, okay, yeah, you can totally have all of that land, that lease rights back, all yours, all good, thank you. We'll go back to Australia now. That was the worst Australian accent ever. I apologize for that. If you think that's what's going to happen, you're fooling yourself. It's not what's going to happen. And the other piece is, as more than a few people have pointed out, the $14 billion number is pure fantasy. And as some people maybe have learned, when somebody's trying to intimidate perhaps a province, let's say a province, when somebody's trying to intimidate a province, maybe they launch a lawsuit or they threaten to launch a lawsuit, or they launch the lawsuit, where they claim an inflated, ridiculous number in the hopes that will scare away the province from continuing to do what it was doing. That never happens. But the other piece that's fascinating is the piece where she talks about the Bill of Rights, where she says, guys, none of this was my doing. But, we made this Bill of Rights, and it enumerated that, everybody has the right to be fairly compensated. So, what are you going to do? I believe in property rights. But that's almost a tacit admission that the decisions, the policies that she made to pander to her base actually made the situation worse. So for her to say, guys, I'm new here, is more than a little bit disingenuous. But there were two other, I'm not going to play the whole thing, don't worry. And none of the other clips were quite that long. But there's two other clips that I really, really want to play because I think they kind of highlight the tone and tenor of the approach that the UCP has towards people who do not immediately share their views. There's certainly Danielle Smith. This is a question that was asked by former Lethbridge Mayor Chris Spearman. We had him on the show. It was a great little chat. And he went to that town hall and he had a question of his own.
The UCP government in 2019 didn't have a mandate to open up the coal mines. The UCP government elected in 2023 didn't have a mandate to open up the coal mines. Could you commit to us as quickly as you did to the separatists that you would hold a referendum on coal mining in Alberta and abide by the results?
Chris, I think you know how citizen-initiated referenda works. You have the ability to, and we did lower the threshold to make it easier for anyone to put a question to the people. You can sign up 177,000 people, and then we can put it on referendum, absolutely. So you feel free to go ahead and do that. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, look, I mean, sure, because what would happen in a yes-no referendum is that there'd be a yes side and there'd be a no side, and Albertans would have to decide if paying $14 billion instead of paying it on schools and hospitals and roads is what they want to do, or whether they think that a reasonable amount of mines can go forward so that we can generate a few $100 million per year. That would happen in a referendum. I encourage you, by all means, because I believe in citizen-initiated referendum, I believe in democracy.
I love the insincerity there. I love I think that's a great idea. You should totally do that. You should punch yourself in the face. You should do that. And then you should tell all of the other Albertans that they would be punching themselves in the face. It's remarkable that Danielle Smith will embolden, and I think that the former mayor, Mr. Spearman, makes an excellent point. It's remarkable that Danielle Smith will happily embolden the separatists. She'll happily embolden the folks that quite literally caused the most economic damage to the province of Alberta. Worth remembering, Danielle Smith, who's so worried about the money and the investment and what will we do? She's the one who put in the 7-month moratorium on renewables that cost billions, was the last number that I read. So for her to be talking about, well, we have to be so responsible, and if you want to convince Albertans it would cost $14 billion, we're going to talk about the pension. We're going to talk about Dani's fictitious numbers as we go throughout the show. But it's that I'm going to pretend to be nice to you, but I'm actually telling you exactly where to go and how to get there. It's not a sincere dialogue. And that's, as we're going to prove later on in the show, very much by design. But there is one other clip that is just so good. We have to play it. And that was one of the things that happened at the town hall, which, by the way, there needs to be significant buy-in from a good number of First Nations folks in Southern Alberta in order to make this thing go ahead or even start to get some traction. There's all kinds of constitutional issues that exist that require First Nations buy-in for this project to go ahead. And there were certainly lots of First Nations folks in attendance. And yet, as is the UCP way, they chose not to do a land acknowledgement, which is, again, a simple, easy thing to do. But especially when you're in somewhere that has, the history that Fort Macleod has, it might be worthwhile throwing out a cursory land acknowledgement. But they didn't. And they were challenged on that. And Brian Jean showed up in maximum Brian Jean to address the question.
Well, folks, I have a large, I don't know if anybody's related to more Indigenous folks than me, but I'm sure there's a couple.
Oh.
Yeah, you can laugh all you want, folks, but my family is Indigenous up in northern Alberta. Treaty 8, 3 different reserves, and I thought I did land acknowledgement. Now, I will tell you that I may not be the most, incredible speaker with words on land acknowledgements, but I thought I clearly indicated that I'm proud of where we're from. I'm proud of our history. I'm proud of our Indigenous, First Nation, and Inuit families and friends, and I'm proud of my family. I hope you're proud to be part of that family too.
There's so much little things going on in there that's so much fun to unpack, because when confronted with, hey, we're having this whole conversation about the land, it requires significant buy-in and significant participation from First Nations folks. Don't you think that doing a land acknowledgement would be appropriate? When your response to that is, look, there's nobody related to more Indigenous people than me, said the white minister of the crown, I feel like maybe that is not perhaps the best reaction. Maybe that's centering yourself in a conversation as opposed to saying, you know what, you're right. We should have done a land acknowledgement. I wish we had. We didn't. I'm very sorry. I have a large Indigenous family. Not me. I'm speaking as Brian Jean fictitiously here. I have a large Indigenous family, and you know what? I let them down tonight, and I shouldn't have done that. I'm very sorry. Totally different answer. But that's not the wheelhouse that these folks go to. And there is another little graphic that I just want to throw up because it really just highlights how quickly, how easily these folks will go to whatever position is most expeditious, or what feels the most expeditious for them. Because Brian Jean is down there. He's like, oh, coal, so good. Love the coal. What did he have to say a few years ago? Oh, look, back in only 2012, when we knew even less about how harmful the coal mining was, when we knew less about how harmful the selenium and everything else was. Back in 2012, Brian Jean tweets out, climate expert says, coal, not oil sands, real threat, bringing some perspective. And then he shared an article from the CBC. But this is the point. When it's expeditious, when it's convenient for folks like Brian Jean to say, oh, hey, you know what? We got to protect the oil sands, oil and gas. Love them. So good. Bathe in the tailing ponds whenever I get the opportunity. When there's something that will work for that, they will say that thing with no thought to what the actual implications or long-term consequences of that position is. They're not taking a position because it has value. They're taking a position because it's convenient. And that is the real fundamental problem with the whole coal discussion. And there's some data that's important to highlight to back that up, because there has been a recent Leger poll that was commissioned by folks from the area, and the numbers are pretty significant. 23% of Albertans, I love how the Global positioned this, 23% of Albertans support coal exploration for mining in the Eastern Slopes. Another way to say that is 77% of Albertans don't. 12% of Albertans think coal development in the Eastern Slope should be allowed if it negatively impacts existing agriculture and tourism industries. Another way to say that is 88% don't. 27% of Albertans agree that the postulated economic benefits of future coal mining in the Eastern Slopes outweigh the environmental risks associated with mining. Again, another way to say that, 73% of Albertans are against it. They don't believe that it's worth it. Now, again, where we're going to get to later, this is important to keep in mind, because it's not about what the overwhelming numbers say when it comes to the UCP government. Of Albertans aware of the proposed coal development, 70% were concerned about possible selenium contamination in the watersheds. 70% were concerned with coal dust carrying downwind from the mine sites. So it's very, very clear. The vast majority of Albertans, and when we start to talk about 77%, that is a vast majority. When we talk about the vast majority of Albertans saying, whoa, we do not want this, then one would think it would be incumbent of the Premier of Alberta to, at the very least, try to exhaust all available options to make sure that it doesn't happen. But that's not what's happening. She's very scared of $4 billion, that imaginary number. Now, that's the coal chunk of the show out of the way. I do want to say, though, we're trying a new thing because I went down. I went down to Fort Mac. My wonderful wife accompanied me to babysit me and make sure that I did not get myself into too much trouble. We went down to Fort Mac. We went down to the Blairmore area. We went down to Grassy Mountain, talked to some folks, got a lot of information. It's a very big, very complex story to tell. To try to do it via the show would probably take it would be like a 9-hour episode, which I don't think anybody wants. So instead, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be putting up little articles. We're doing the article thing now here at the Breakdown on our Patreon as well as on our Substack, where we go through and we try to explore in the most fulsome way possible the whole coal piece, bringing in as many perspectives as we possibly can. This is going to go on throughout the summer. We're going to try to post them every Sunday. So keep an eye out for that, because I hear the Substack is where it's all happening. But for sure, for our patrons, you're going to get immediate access to that. So there's that little plug there. Moving on from there, though, we got to talk about this dude. Remember him? Remember when he was coming to the house and he was making a mess of the casserole and everything? This is a very deep cut pandemic reference for Alberta. There's some changes coming to the COVID vaccines and the COVID vaccine availability in the province of Alberta. And it has a lot of people very, very concerned. So to start with, let's take a look at what the changes are going to be. From the press release, due to changes to the federal, and of course, we're trying to find a way to blame the feds right out of the gates. Due to changes to the federal COVID-19 vaccine procurement earlier this year, provinces and territories are now responsible for purchasing COVID-19 vaccines for residents. Alberta's government remains committed to ensuring Albertans who are at the highest risk due to COVID-19 have access to immunizations. Starting this fall, Albertans who are at the higher risk of severe outcomes from COVID-19 will be able to access the vaccine through public health clinics in the province. From Adriana LaGrange, in previous years, we've seen significant vaccine wastage. By shifting to a targeted approach and introducing pre-ordering, we aim to better supply better align supply with demand, ensuring we remain fiscally responsible while continuing to protect those at highest risk. So what are the various phases that we're talking about here? There's a few that are important to consider. So according to the government's release, through phase 1, provincially funded COVID-19 vaccines will be... Sorry, let me just make sure I get this right. Here we go. Through phase 1, provincially funded COVID-19 vaccines will be available free of charge to residents of seniors' supportive living accommodations and home care clients. So if you are in a long-term care facility, you can have the vaccines free of charge. If you're getting home care, you can have the vaccines free of charge. Through phases 2, 3, and 4, to prevent significant waste, the COVID-19 vaccine will only be available through public health clinics. Community pharmacies will no longer be administering COVID-19 vaccines. In phase 2, provincially funded COVID-19 vaccines will be available free of charge for those 6 months and older with underlying medical conditions or compromised immune systems in congregate living accommodations, Albertans on social programs, age, income supports, and individuals experiencing homelessness. Phase 3. Through phase 3, the COVID-19 vaccine will be available to all Albertans 65 and older. Albertans in phase 3 will be required to cover the full costs of the vaccine. So seniors over the age of 65 will cover they got to pay for the full cost of the vaccine. Work is underway to determine what the final cost will be per vaccine. In phase 4, remaining COVID-19 vaccines will be available to other Albertans who will be required to pay the full costs of the vaccine. Now, a lot to unpack there, and this is the standard part of the show where I go, I've got a bit of a bias here, because you might notice nowhere in that list is healthcare workers. And I happen to be, when I'm not doing this, a healthcare worker. healthcare workers were also one of the significant vectors in the initial first waves of COVID, especially healthcare workers who were moving in and out of long-term care facilities, nursing homes. So that's not great that we're not going to be offering any protection for healthcare workers who will be taking care of the people who do get COVID, especially given that now if you're under the age of 65 and you don't have any of these things, you're SOL. And it doesn't align with what the National Advisory Committee on Immunization recommends. Let's take a look at those recommendations. From the National Advisory Committee on Immunization, recommends a COVID-19 vaccine for previously vaccinated and unvaccinated individuals at risk of SARS-CoV-2 exposure or severe COVID-19 disease, which includes the following individuals. This is who the NACI says should be getting shots. These are the people who we should be making sure are getting shots. All adults 65 years of age or older. Those 6 months of age and older who are residents of long-term care homes and other congregate living settings, individuals with underlying medical conditions that place them at a higher risk of severe COVID-19, including children with complex health needs, pregnant women and individuals who are pregnant, individuals in or from First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities, healthcare workers, and other care providers in facilities and community settings, members of racialized and other equity-denied communities. Recommendation B, NACI recommends that all other previous vaccinated and unvaccinated individuals who are not at increased risk for COVID exposure or severe COVID disease, not on the list above, may still get a COVID-19 vaccine. So the experts are very, very clearly saying this is who should be getting. Dani and Adriana LaGrange apparently have decided this is who we're going to give it to. Everybody else has to pay out of pocket. And the justification that Danielle Smith offered on Your Province, Your Premier was pretty stunning.
At a time when Alberta is experiencing its worst measles outbreak in 50 years, your government is planning to make Albertans pay out of pocket for COVID-19 vaccines starting this fall. What kind of message does that send about Alberta's commitment to public health? And are you concerned this could set a precedent that discourages broad-based vaccination?
Well, I would say they're two totally different things. Measles, number one, is highly, highly contagious. They recommend that you get a 95% vaccination rate to stop the spread. And children can die and go blind and have deafness as a result of it. And that's why we have a very high level of vaccination rate for measles. Influenza, they do recommend that it should be offered to everyone on an annual basis. We've got about a 22% pickup rate based on last year. And then with COVID, the recommendation is to offer it to those who are immunocompromised, those who are at the most risk. And so when we looked at, now that we have to develop our own new program for payment, it was paid for by the government. The sad part was we threw away over 1 million doses because people just don't want to get the vaccine in the same rates as others.
And why do you think that is?
We only had about 30. Well, I think it's because it doesn't work particularly well, if you want the truth. I mean, a vaccine is one where you get an injection once or twice, and then you never develop the underlying condition. And so you have to judge vaccines on that basis. With influenza, you have to get a new strain each year. And so it's reasonably effective, probably about 65% effectiveness most years. COVID, it ends up mutating very quickly.
Yeah, it's in that same family of coronavirus.
That's right.
Which
That's why it's
mutate.
very difficult to develop an effective vaccine for us. So it's not a vaccine like measles. It's more of an immunity booster. And so for those who have a compromised immune system, those are the ones who are recommended to get it the most. And so that's what we're targeting it for, people who are in a congregate setting, people who are immune compromised. But anyone is going to be allowed to get it if they choose, if they want to assess their own level of risk. We believe in vaccine choice, but we don't pay for everything. We don't pay for RSV for everyone. We only have that dedicated to the most at-risk individuals, and we're taking the same approach with COVID.
Now, there's a lot, as always, to unpack there. One of the biggest things to unpack, though, is the idea that if you get a vaccine, then you're good to go from whatever you just got vaccinated from, and you never ever have to worry about catching it, and you'll never ever develop any kinds of symptoms. That is not at all how vaccines work. There are some vaccines that can, in some people, provide results like that. But the overwhelming goal of vaccines is to prevent the severity of the symptoms. For the overwhelming majority of vaccines that are out there, that's the whole point. So that if you do get exposed or infected with whatever is the thing, it won't kill you as much. That's the whole point. There are very, very few vaccines that offer 100% protection for life. It's a very, very, very rare thing. So it's important to correct the premier on that. The second thing is when she talks about immunocompromised, one of the things that's going to be really fascinating to watch for is what her definition of immunocompromised is. Because again, going to the National Advisory Committee on Immunization, here's what their list looks like. Here's who they say. If you have these underlying medical conditions, they don't say immunocompromised. They say if you have these underlying medical conditions, then you for sure should be seriously talking to your physician about getting a COVID-19 vaccine. Cancer, cerebrovascular disease, chronic kidney disease, chronic liver diseases. Then it lists off a whole bunch of them. Chronic lung diseases, lists off a whole bunch of them. Cystic fibrosis, diabetes, both type 1 and type 2. Disabilities, heart conditions, HIV infection, mental health disorders, mood disorders, including depression, schizophrenia spectrum disorders, obesity. The vast majority of people walking around right now are, to some degree, obese. That's just the reality. Pregnancy and recent pregnancy, primary immunodeficiency diseases, smoking current or former. If you've ever smoked, the NACI says you should get a COVID vaccine. Solid organ or blood stem cell transplant, tuberculosis, use of corticosteroids or other immunosuppressive medication. So for all of the asthmatics out there, for all of the COPDers, if you take one of those daily steroid puffers, congratulations, you're on the NACI list. It'll be fascinating to see whether or not you make the Alberta list, though. But let's take it a step farther. Because Dani said, it doesn't work. Hey, is there any research into whether or not it actually works? Oh, look, there is. This report, many doctors from the CDC. This is the Centers for Disease Control. Dani's made it very clear she prefers American, air quote, science over any other kind of science. What does the CDC have to say about the interim estimates of 2024-2025 COVID vaccine effectiveness among adults aged greater than 18 years? It actually says quite a bit, and it's really quite important. What does it say? It says, in June 2024, CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices recommended 2024-2025 COVID-19 vaccination for all persons aged greater than 6 months to provide additional protection against severe COVID-19. What is added by this report? Vaccine effectiveness, or VE, of 2024-2025 COVID-19 vaccine was 33% against COVID-19 associated emergency department or urgent care visits among adults aged 18 years and 45 to 46% against hospitalizations among immunocompetent adults aged greater than 65 years. So what it's saying is the COVID-19 vaccine decreases the amount of people who need to access an emergency department or an urgent care by 33%. And for people who have any of those health issues that I just listed off, it decreases the need to access hospitalizations by 45 to 46%. So it should be pretty clear as we're having conversations in the province of Alberta about the healthcare system that's actively falling apart. One of the ways that we can massively decrease visits to emergency rooms, to urgent cares, and we can decrease hospitalizations again by 45 to 46% for adults over the age of 65 is by making sure everybody gets vaccinated. Now, if you can't get vaccinated, if your doctor doesn't recommend it, that's fine. This is not a vaccine shaming party that we're having here. But the point is, Danielle Smith and the UCP are again making decisions that are not only not based on science, not based on evidence, and they're not considering the long-term financial impact. They're doing what a very specific segment of the base wants. And it doesn't stop there. Because one of the other things that Danielle Smith said when she was talking about the measles was, oh, you need about 95% vaccination rates in order to have herd immunity. And the word that she used, was Alberta has a very high level of vaccination. Well, let's go back to the presentation that we talked about a month ago with Dr. Mark Joffe, who was the former chief medical officer of health, when he attended the grand rounds for the University of Alberta. What does the actual vaccination rates for measles look like for the entire province? 69%. And the population bases in Calgary and Edmonton are doing a lot of heavy lifting to make those numbers happen, because when you take a look at North Zone, 57.5%. When you take a look at the zone between Calgary and Edmonton, Central Zone, you're looking at 57.7%. When you look at South Zone, you're looking at 59.6%. But those numbers, you can't look at an entire province and go, oh, hey, we've made it to 69%, which is, again, a lot lower than the required 95. But when you start to take a look at specific counties, there are counties in Alberta that have measles vaccination. So to be clear, I'm not talking about COVID anymore. I'm talking about MMR. Northern Alberta, there are counties that have 10%. Central Zone, 24%. South Zone, 25%. That is a far cry from the 95%. So for Danielle Smith to take a victory lap on how high our levels are for MMR vaccinations in the province of Alberta is, again, just another indicator that she doesn't know what she's talking about. And what's scary about this is she's trying to put people's minds at ease, you see, as the province crosses over 1,000 measles cases so far this season. She's trying to say, it's cool. We're at the 95 mark, everybody. We've got the herd immunity. It's okay. Well, the number of measles cases and the fact that Alberta per capita is leading the country in the number of measles cases is indicative of the fact that, no, we don't have that herd immunity. And a large part of that is because, as Dr. Joffe said in his first presentation after leaving the office of the CMOH, the actual doses are 69%, which is not very good. There's another little announcement that Danielle Smith rolled out this week that has to do with seniors' drug coverage. And it is also, it is not good news, especially if you're a senior. From that announcement, to address rising costs and ensure coverage can continue to be provided in the years to come. See, we have to do this. Otherwise, we won't be able to provide coverage. See how we've already got that subtext of fear going on in the messaging? The maximum copayment for a prescription will increase by a total of $10 over a 10-month period. Beginning 1st of July, 2025, the maximum copayment will increase by $1 each month until it reaches $35 on April 26th. Or April 1st, 2026. If co-payments had increased in line with inflation, seniors would now be paying approximately $48. So look, we're doing such a great job. We're charging you more, but we're still charging you less than the inflation rate. So preventative medicine be damned. The average prescription copayment is $11.30 for Albertans with non-group coverage and $8.44 for those with coverage for seniors. It is anticipated that these average copayments will increase to $14.31 and $9.87 respectively. And this is, again, another one of those things that is not super great, because it's going to cost people more to get their medications. Those medications keep them from having to go to the hospital. And this happens at a time when Danielle Smith is crapping all over the proposed federal drug plan. But even worse, Danielle Smith knows and knew that one of the biggest concerns that seniors were facing going into the last election was drug costs.
We did a lot of hard work about what we think the priorities are for Albertans. And so out of that came a number of different things. Number one, I would say, is the affordability crisis that we're facing. We can talk a little bit more about that, but I'll tell you just high level what I hear when I go to the doors. When I was door knocking down in Brooks Medicine Hat, every time you met a senior, they were concerned about the cost of groceries and their home heating and electricity and their prescription drug costs.
So Dani knows. Dani knows the number one concern of the seniors when she was doing the door knocking was the cost of prescription drug coverage. But again, here we have her increasing that cost for reasons. We have one more clip of Danielle Smith on the healthcare piece, and this gets to be relevant for what's coming later in the show.
I think it was an error to remove the health premiums that we had years ago, because it depleted a vital source of revenue, and it also disconnected people from being a user of a vital service. So I think that we need to bring that back, but bring it back in a smarter way. Bring it back in the forms of a genuine insurance program where you would pay some kind of deductible, right? So you don't need any major surgery in a year. You don't pay any portion towards your cost. You do have a major surgery in your year, and then you pay a portion of the cost in a deductible, just like you would if you had a claim in your car insurance or claim in your house insurance. And you can set it up in a way that is also going to ensure that there's equity. So if you're a low income individual, under $75,000 per year, maybe you have no deductible. If you earn between $75,000 and $150,000, maybe you pay a $500 deductible. If you earn over $150,000, you pay a $1,000 deductible. This is not unfamiliar. We've seen health premiums before here. We've seen health premiums based on income in Ontario and in BC. I don't think it would violate the Canada Health Act, but importantly, it would connect people to the fact that healthcare is not free. And it would also, if you had to pay a portion of the cost associated with any major treatment, you'd be a lot more discerning and you'd be a lot more demanding about being able to get that treatment on time. And I think it would put a lot of pressure for reform on the health system. The other thing I'd say is I think that we need to change the conversation about what we pay for through our health spending accounts and what we pay for through catastrophic government insurance and that the government pays for directly. So I think we can all agree you need a knee replacement, you need heart surgery, you need cancer treatment. That falls into the catastrophic category. Most of us would be bankrupt if we got diagnosed with any of those illnesses and had to be treated. But a regular checkup to your doctor, does that really have to be something that is covered 100% by government, or should that be paid for out of your health spending account? And maybe you don't want to see a doctor this year. Maybe you need to see a nutritionist instead, or maybe you need to see a psychologist because we've suffered mentally because of the lockdown for the last 18 months. I think that if you create a system where all of those initial kinds of treatments are put on par, creates funding for the health spending plan, but it also is more comprehensive. It would allow for more services to be covered for a wider range of services. And I firmly believe, if anyone thinks that, I firmly believe our nonprofit sector would step up as well. If we identified that there were shortfalls for certain low-income individuals, I bet there would be all kinds of charities working on raising money so that they could help to provide those additional funds. And it would be a mechanism to be able to make sure that everyone gets the vital services that they need. But we need something transformational. So this would be a way of bringing new dollars into healthcare, but also I think transformational in how healthcare is delivered.
See, so that's Danielle Smith in 2021, and she's talking about how unfortunate it is that we got rid of the Alberta healthcare premiums. For those of you that are too young to remember, God bless you. But for quite a while, there were healthcare premiums that people had to pay. I believe it was quarterly payments that you had to make. Now, it wasn't the massive revenue stream that Danielle Smith makes it out in that clip, because the infrastructure to collect those payments, to follow up on collecting those payments, all of the pieces consumed the majority of the money that was collected. So it wasn't like it was a huge revenue stream into healthcare. Really important to keep that in mind. But Danielle Smith makes it very, very clear. So what we need to do is we need to get people, they need to be paying for their healthcare. We need to maybe make some better choices. And if people have to pay a little bit more for healthcare, then that's okay. This is a recurring theme. So again, this is another example of how Danielle Smith will talk out of both sides of her mouth. Because on one hand, she'll say, hey, you know what the door is? Boy, I heard that seniors really want to make sure that their medication costs don't up. And then she'll raise the medication costs. And she'll do it because fundamentally, she does believe you should be paying more for healthcare. But getting to the announcement sans press conference, Danielle Smith made a fascinating announcement earlier this week. And this is where we're really going to get into the healthcare stuff. I'm going to let her explain the changes that she felt the need to make to how healthcare is administered in the province of Alberta.
We're making a change. We're moving away from a heavy corporate administrative structure with more local decision-making through hospital-based leadership. Soon, each facility will have an empowered leadership team supporting our sites, responsible for hiring, managing resources, and solving problems, without sending every request into the vortex. Sites will have the ability to direct dollars to the greatest need and action local decision-making. Because when the people closest to the problem have the power to fix it, things get better.
Oh, she's so close. She's so close to getting it, but not quite. The plan is that there are going to be certain areas of administration that were formally centralized with Alberta Health Services that will now be administered by specific hospital sites. There's a lot of different ways to interpret this. Is one way to interpret it that it could be creating duplication? 100%. Is another way to interpret it that this could be a way of making these little hospital packages so that they're that much easier to sell off? We're going to play a few clips in a minute. I'll let you be the judge of that. But the reality is we're talking about a duplication of services, and we're talking about by giving hospitals greater control, the specific admin, the specific management, greater control over what happens in that hospital. You also give them greater control over what doesn't happen in that hospital. And there's nowhere in any of this, despite the fact that many physicians and many healthcare experts have raised the concerns that says this is going to be how we slowly close the door on reproductive health care. This is how we slowly close the door on access to abortion. This is how we slowly close the door on medical gender affirming care. We're just going to make it so that these hospitals, if these admins want to keep their shiny hospitals and not have it handed over to Bobby's Hospital Corp, they'll do exactly what we quietly ask them to do. Very real concerns. And very, very legitimate concerns as well, especially when you take into account the specifics of what these changes allegedly are going to be. From the press release, since Alberta's government announced plans to refocus the healthcare system in November 2023, a consistent message has emerged from patients, frontline healthcare workers, and concerned Albertans alike about the flaws of the prior system. Alberta Health Services' current zone-based leadership structure is overly complex and bureaucratic. So we're going to add more bureaucrats at a lower level. That was me editorializing, not the press release. It lacks the flexibility and responsiveness needed to effectively support facilities and staff, particularly when it comes to hiring, securing supplies, and adopting necessary technologies. That is why Alberta's government is changing to a hospital-based leadership structure. On-site leadership teams will be responsible for hiring staff, managing resources, and solving problems to effectively serve their patients and communities. Hospitals will now have the flexibility to respond, freedom to adapt, and authority to act so they can meet the needs of their facilities, patients, and workforces in real time. What works in Calgary or Edmonton isn't always what works in Camrose or Peace River. That's why we're cutting through bureaucracy and putting real decision-making power back in the hands of local hospital leaders so they can act fast, hire who they need, and deliver better care for their communities. That's Premier Danielle Smith. But here's the problem. The reason why all of those things happened so slowly was not because the mechanisms didn't exist. It's because the money didn't and still doesn't. With this announcement, there are no new resources being added to the deck of the Titanic. We're not adding any new lifeboats to the deck of the Titanic. Instead, what we're saying is, okay, we have the same number of lifeboats. It's grossly insufficient. But Timmy, you're in charge of these 5. Tammy, you're in charge of these 5. Best of luck. Do well, or we'll find somebody else. The reason why things happened so slowly in the former system is because multiple governments underfunded it. And if you talk to any healthcare expert with any credibility, if you talk to anybody who's worked in healthcare and had to deal with the budget system that exists in healthcare, it was a money problem. It was not a bureaucracy problem, period. If the healthcare system was funded properly, there would be MRI machines in every urgent care, in every hospital. There wouldn't be backlogs on any of those things because we just buy the equipment. If we appropriately paid healthcare workers and didn't go to war with physicians like the Kenney government did, we'd have lots of physicians. I had a conversation with somebody at that town hall that I talked about earlier, and they pointed out the fact that for many healthcare workers, if you come to Canada under the temporary worker plan, I'm getting the term wrong. You come to Canada and you're going to work under that temporary foreign worker plan. If you're going to a job that you're going to make less than, I think it's roughly $35 an hour, then you have to be told you are making a low wage. It's in the law, apparently. Now, there are tons of healthcare workers who make well less than that. That's where the problem is. We underfund healthcare. That's the problem. No amount of bureaucracy, no cutting of bureaucracy, no, in this case, increasing of bureaucracy is going to address those issues. It's just simply not enough. But let's rearrange the deck chairs, shall we? AHS health zones will be eliminated and acute care sites will be integrated into the 7 regional corridors. So we're basically going back to the old health boards. These sites will operate under a new leadership model that emphasizes site-level performance management. Clear expectations will be set by Acute Care Alberta, and site operations will be managed by AHS through a hospital-based management framework. All acute care sites will be required to report to Acute Care Alberta based on these defined performance standards. And this is where we got to talk about where's the long game in all of this? And fortunately, Danielle Smith, over the last few years, has done a very, very good job of spelling out what her long game is.
I can tell you in rural locations, when our rural communities are finding their hospitals are closing at 6 o'clock at night, or for a month because you're not able to get the treatment. And as you get further and further north, to women who are pregnant, worried that they're going to give birth on the highway because they don't deliver babies in the local community, we've got serious issues in our rural hospitals. And my view has been that we're going to take away every excuse from the AHS to be delivering poor service. And ultimately, what happens is if you find that your operator cannot operate the facility the way you need to meet the local concerns, you find a new operator. And we're going to be prepared to do that if we have to. I don't want to start there, but do know that that's ultimately where we'll give them everything that they need to be able to perform well. But ultimately, if they can't deliver the service that you need, we have to find new management.
So again, fundamentally, it's a management issue. It's not a money issue. We'll give them everything we need, except for money. We'll give them all the tools. We'll give them all the little bureaucratic snares that they can run into. And that was just in October 2024. From that same night, here's what she said she wanted AHS to be doing.
We know we're heading in the right direction. We have to get our hospitals focused on hospital care. They shouldn't be focused on mental health and addiction or homelessness or people who should be in assisted living or long-term care. And that's how we're separating the system, is that we want Alberta Health Services to be laser focused on delivering efficient, effective emergency care and efficient, effective surgeries. And they can't do that until we start creating other authorities to take all of those other things off their plate. That work is just beginning, and we'll begin to see more progress in the next year.
Okay, might have lied a little bit. That was not the clip that I was going for. That was from her on Your Province, Your Premier. But it works. We can still go. Now we'll go to the next clip. And this is where, again, she doubles down. This is from August 17th of 2024. She doubles down on that threat. If we create the framework, we don't give them any more money. But if we create the framework and they don't do what we tell them, there will be consequences.
The four things we're dividing is divided based on function. Primary care is going to be sort of a separate function. Assisted living is going to be a separate function. Mental health and addiction is a central separate function. And acute care is a separate function. We need Alberta Health Services to focus on delivering the best care in the 106 facilities they operate for us. They have been distracted trying to run everything else. So we're taking away all of their excuses. And I can tell you also that we're prepared to take away their authority to operate hospitals as well. In Macleod, we're moving the hospital authority over to Covenant Health. Covenant Health has never closed down rural hospitals. And so why is it that Covenant Health is able to keep operating rooms and hospitals open 24 hours a day, but AHS can't? And it may well be that we just need different operators in the smaller communities so that we can get back to delivering that level of care. We're very open-minded about it. I want to give AHS every opportunity to succeed, but do know that our number one is making sure that you get your health care close to home. So that's the direction that we're going. The other aspect is that we're taking back the authority over the buildings that we build. So when we build a building, we hand it off to AHS and then we have no control over it afterwards. We've stopped that practice. Now, anytime we build a building, we're going to continue to own it as government, and we will lease it to an operator. Now, why is that important? Because if our operator isn't performing the services we need them to, we're going to take it back. Right. So that's the structure that we're setting up. The next phase is to see how many of those hospitals that AHS currently operates that we can retake ownership over. We can't do it for all of them, but that, I think, gives us, you have to have a user, when you're dealing with a monopoly, and they believe that they can deliver any type of care and there's no consequences, they're going to continue to deliver bad service. And competition is one option. That's why we're offering charter surgical centers or why we're offering Covenant. But the other is the fear of having it taken away. That's going to be a very powerful competitive incentive for the managers to say, oh my goodness, if we continue to deliver terrible care in Drayton Valley, then somebody else is going to be chosen as the operator. So just know, like, I know it's a slow process. We had to campaign on this to be able to get the authority from Albertans to go forward and make these changes. I think Albertans are giving us the benefit of the doubt that things are going to get better, but my goodness, it takes time to do it.
Now, that was Danielle Smith very clearly articulating what her long-term game plan was for hospitals. And we saw that play out in the last legislative session because she did introduce legislation to transfer all of the property that AHS formerly owned into the hands of Alberta Infrastructure. And there were a lot of people who raised the alarm at that point in time because their very real concerns were, hey, if she actually does this, does this mean that she can move a step closer to her plans of, if she wants to, bringing in new operators to run hospitals? And she loves to throw out the examples of, well, you know, this one time I talked to this person and they said that they weren't able to just do the things. And on its face, those examples sound pretty bad.
That's what we're aiming towards, is this blend, because there are some great things that came out of the centralization. The fact that we do have the ability to have centralized procurement and get good prices when we go out to buy medical equipment and pharmaceuticals, that's positive. We do have a system where we can have centralized payroll and centralized legal and centralized technology. That's all great. I look at it as having managers come down to a different level. right? Because right now all the managers are in AHS or at the zone level. I want managers at the hospital level. So maybe somebody who's currently under capacity at one of the zone levels, maybe we give them a little bit of authority and ability to make decisions, and they go down and they manage a hospital for us. That's what I think we can do. I mean, I clearly do believe that there's way too much middle management. There are too many people who have the authority to say no, and not enough people who have the authority to say yes. And you give people the power, give them the resources, give them the authority to say yes at the local level. We are going to get so much better service, and we're going to solve some of these problems that we keep hearing about. I mean, and it's been a problem for a long time. I remember when I was in politics the first time, going to a hospital down south, and they told me, well, you know, when we run out of bleach, we're not allowed to go down to the Home Hardware and buy a $5 bottle of bleach. We have to go through central procurement. When I went up north, I was told that they had to truck their laundry 3 hours up the highway to high level because they weren't allowed to do laundry in their own community. People were losing their hearing aids or their dentures, not getting them back. Some of the things just don't make sense.
No, they don't.
Sometimes you got to just make the decision to do things locally, allow people to have that empowerment to get better service. It's all got to be about the patient experience.
And again, we have Danielle Smith playing the game of, I'm going to say one thing that makes sense, and then I'm going to say something that directly contradicts it and hope you don't notice. One of the great things that came out of AHS was being able to do the procurement piece. But the problem is that the hospitals, they're not able to procure their own stuff. So we're going to let the hospitals procure their own stuff because, you know, people can't buy the bleach. When the real question that should be asked is, why did we run out of bleach? That's the fundamental question that should be asked. Yes, in a case of an emergency, if somebody needs to buy bleach, there should be a way for them to be able to get their hands on some bleach quickly. But if the problem that you're looking at is, well, we can't implement the Band-Aid solution, then you're not looking at the real problem. And the real problem is, why did they run out of bleach? And it's wild that Danielle Smith continues to bang the drum of, well, it's the managers. There's just so many managers, but they're all at the zone level. There's no managers working in any hospital. I would challenge anybody who works in healthcare to take a look at their own individual org chart. And you can even take a look at the org charts that exist if you don't work in healthcare. I assure you, there are plenty of managers who work in hospitals. What Danielle Smith has done with this reorganization has nothing to do with decreasing the amount of management. It has to do with absolving herself of responsibility and pushing responsibility onto more people while not providing them the resources, the dollars that they need to actually get the job done. And it leads to the question, what is the point? What is the point of doing all of this? Is it just reflexive? We're going to change Alberta Health Services because they made me really mad during the pandemic? Or is there something more insidious at play? And Danielle Smith has made it clear in those clips that we've already played, if AHS can't get the job done, what are you going to do? We'll find another operator. And she has rebuilt the entire healthcare structure in the province of Alberta to make sure that if AHS can't get the job done, then we'll bring in some other operators. But you have to wonder, was that the plan all along? And the answer is, you don't have to wonder.
Is our system comprehensive now? Of course it isn't. It pays for hospital services and it pays for doctor services, and pretty well everything else can be paid for under a health spending account. That is the way that we can absolutely transform the way our healthcare system works, and it would only cost $1.5 billion. So here's the plan. Just establish a health spending account with $350 for every single Albertan, and tell them your employer can match it. You can match it. You can put money in tax-free. You can gift it to a friend or family member. If you don't need it, you want to set up a charity because you know that there are others who need more serious care, you can contribute it to, you can transfer it between different accounts. It would only cost $1.5 billion, and I guarantee you it would absolutely change the relationship between the doctor and the patient. It would restore that relationship and would take the college out as the intermediary, take Alberta Health Services out as the intermediary, and we would see a proliferation of the kind of clinics that I was talking about, and the kind of telehealth services and the kind of surgical services I was talking about just a minute ago. You need to give people the means to spend their own money on these types of services. Otherwise, and we've seen it, otherwise people will just sit and they'll wait and they'll hope that the government or the politicians or their doctor or someone will find a way for them to get the care that we need. We need to empower patients. We need to give them the means to do it. Second thing that we need to do is we need to split the roles of purchaser, provider, and auditor. I've interviewed Nadeem Esmail so many times from the Fraser Institute, and understand this is the true nature of the problem. This is why no matter how much money we pour into the funnel at the top of Alberta Health Services, none of it is going to get down to the front line. It's because we have Alberta Health Services receives the money, and then Alberta Health Services contracts with themselves to spend the money. And then we ask Alberta Health Services to evaluate their own performance and say, how you're doing? And guess what they say? We're doing fantastic. Now think about splitting these roles. You give money to Alberta Health Insurance. It's a separate entity. It's a government entity, so it's publicly administered. They are forbidden from running any programs or any hospitals themselves. Alberta Health Services becomes the contractor. Sure, we can grandfather in their contracts for now, but then we would have the Alberta Health Quality Council do us an auditor function and tell us whether or not Alberta Health Services should continue running the Lougheed Hospital or the Rocky View Hospital or South Campus or any of the 100 hospitals that they currently run in majority in the province. And if they can't meet the terms that we want them to, we can do an RFP. And then the Alberta Health Insurance can give a different contract to a different group of doctors and a different group of patients and a different entity to run all of our hospitals. That is completely compliant with the Canada Health Act. It's a structure issue and it's a political will issue. And we've got neither of those, unfortunately, because I presented this to the health minister and they did not act on it. The third thing that we need to do is that we need to have a global budget and activity-based funding combined. Because what needs to occur is that any hospital needs to be able to contract directly so that they can get their funds directly and get outside of this structure that we have where it's sort of trickle down, whatever finally makes it to the front line, whatever decisions will finally allow you to have, will let you have. We already have a mechanism to set up private surgical centers. So imagine if High River Hospital, which does most of the hernia operations, by the way, in Southern Alberta, what if they said, you know what? We don't need to be under the umbrella of Alberta Health Services. We'd like to charter directly with Alberta Health Insurance and get our money directly. And you give a global budget to pay for what you would expect the emergency room to be on a traditional basis, but then they get paid based on activity. If they're able to do 1,000 hernias, they get paid on a per patient treatment for 1,000 hernias. If they're able to change their operations so they can do 2,000 hernia operations, then you allow the funding to follow through. None of these things would be outside the realm of what is currently possible under the Canada Health Act. I think what has happened is politicians have blamed the Canada Health Act because they're not prepared to make some of these decisions. These decisions can be made very easily, and there's probably others that would develop out of it.
If you listen to Danielle Smith in that clip and you ask yourself, what is it that she described that hasn't happened in her restructuring of healthcare in the province of Alberta? She's brought in the activity-based funding. She's restructured everything so that she can bring in new operators if need be. And the only thing that you really have to change in that whole diatribe of hers in order to make that clip from 2021 perfectly relevant to 2025 is instead of where she says Alberta Health Insurance, substitute out Alberta Health Insurance and substitute in Acute Care Alberta. Because AHS now reports to Acute Care Alberta. There is a clear vision and design that Danielle Smith has been holding on to for years for healthcare in the province of Alberta. And when it comes to what sort of consultation or what sort of course correction she's willing to make, she's answered that question too.
We've been told that there were no official consultation between AHS and Alberta Health and with frontline workers in the mental health service. How do you think it will affect this structure?
Well, look, we've been pretty clear from the very beginning that we were going to be refocusing healthcare.
So there were no official meeting with frontline workers in the mental health department?
Well, I can talk to maybe Kerry can answer that, since he's the one who's going to be overseeing it.
Thank you, Premier. Yeah, prior to the actual announcements of the refocusing, there wasn't any direct engagement from a staffing perspective.
So you don't need their input?
Well, let me just say, look, we're moving in this direction, and we will get input on implementation. Like it wasn't a question of whether we were doing this or not. We made it clear we were doing it, and now we're announcing what it looks like. We're putting the pieces in place, and now on the implementation, we'll be doing a lot of input, because that's where we're going to get the best ideas about how to make some of the changes. I mean, the whole purpose of moving this over was to move it over with the least disruption possible, with the continuity of staff, with the continuity of service delivery. Now it becomes the work of how do we improve it? And absolutely, we want to have our frontline engaging in that. So now that we've started this new structure, that work begins.
Now, before we move on from this topic to the slightly less controversial topic of pension plans, halal mortgages, and book banning, there's one more clip that is really, really important to understand about Danielle Smith and her motivations. There's one more clip to understanding why she doesn't listen to opposing voices and why she only listens and responds to the voices that are already on her team or that she thinks that she can bring over. And she was very, very clear about this, again, back in 2021.
I've been in public policy research for 25 years. I mean, this is part of the frustration I have, is everything I'm talking about today, I was writing and talking about 25 years ago. Nothing's changed. The solutions have stayed the same, but nothing's changed. And part of what needs to happen is we need to recognize, as I'm going to be crass here, Paul's going to be mad at me, but I ran into Jim Dinning with a candidate over an election, and he said, I've got one piece of advice for you. Don't try to win every effing vote. And that's what we always try to do. We try to win every vote. We will never win the 35% of people who love Rachel Notley, will support Rachel Notley, and want Rachel Notley to be premier. We'll never win them over. So why are we trying to? We've got probably another 35% that should be with us if we were just acting in a principled way and doing what we said we were going to do, and not changing our mind and going in a 180-degree different direction every time something trends on Twitter or the press gallery gets angry.
And there it is. And that is the fundamental difference between craven politics and actual leadership. And Danielle Smith made those comments before she returned to politics. Those were values that she, not just on that occasion, but on others, spoke about. This goes to the wait till the left sees what we have in store for them. We're going to make their heads explode. The notion that Danielle Smith in any way cares about the 35%, to use her numbers, that are negatively impacted by her policies, that are negatively impacted by her choices, that aren't already on Team Dani, is simply false. If she can get the other 35, the mushy middle, she'll give it a try. But Danielle Smith does not lead. She governs, and she governs for the people who brought her to the dance. And that's it. And she has made it that clear herself. And another really good example of that has to do with the recent results coming out of the pension plan. Because Danielle Smith, for a good chunk of time, was talking about how we were going to do so great. And there was this 35%. Those numbers, they keep coming up, don't they? As if they're just invented, but regurgitated regularly. When she was talking about the pension plan, we got a third of the provinces with us. We got a third of the provinces against us, but we got to get that third. That's maybe we can convince them. And this is where we got to give full props to the good gentleman who pursued this story relentlessly. This is the story coming out is full props due to Matthew Black. Now, before we get into the nuts and bolts, there is a pension clip that is important to play because, again, you got to go back to old Dani to see what current Dani is up to and why she's doing it.
What else have we got here? The bigger issue with CPP is the investment board's woke agenda, where they're starting to divest itself of oil and gas investments, which withdraws funds from those companies into doing more development. And APP would fix this by ensuring an investment into our own industries. 100%. We'd have to have a conversation about that because the way Norway operates its sovereign fund is that they do not do investments in Norwegian companies to avoid the appearance of crony capitalism. So I'll put that to you. However, Quebec uses all of its mechanisms of financing to provide special tax credits and supports to its local industry, which allows them to come here and be able to compete against our companies that don't have the same supports. So there's a couple of different models. I don't know which one we would settle on here, but if the rest of the country, especially the big banks and the big pension funds, are going to be punishing our industry. Did you see Antonio Guterres' comments? He was speaking to a convocation ceremony of graduates, telling them not to get jobs in the fossil fuel industry. And credit to Sonia Savage, our energy minister, saying that's bananas, because whether it's hydrogen, whether it's carbon capture, whether it's carbon technology turning carbon dioxide into useful products, or whether it's going to be in reclamation of our well sites, there are all kinds of ways that the future leaders and graduates are going to have high-paying, excellent jobs in the energy sector. So it's absurd. I mean, these extremists who are at the heads of these international agencies, I have no idea why our prime minister feels we need to suck up to them. They are dangerous, and we need to push back against them. So one of the ways we push back is making sure that we repatriate our own investment dollars so that we can, if we need to, make sure that we can counteract some of that hostility.
Very first thing she says at the start of the clip, the woke agenda. Oh, we got to make sure that we're supporting our oil and gas. 100%. Not, that's an interesting idea. Not that it never occurred to me. 100% she agrees with the person. That video, by the way, compliments of the amazing Twitter account Disordered YYC. She agrees with it 100%. We should be reinvesting the money into oil and gas. And that's a really good indication as to why she pushed the pension plan so hard when she knew better. Because as Matthew Black reported, the numbers for the pension plan were not the numbers that Dani kept talking about. More than 94,000 responses were received between September 1st, 2023 and December 10th, 2023. People who were pro Alberta pension plan, 10%. Only 10%. People who were undecided or unsure, 12%. So the two categories that Dani would like to give 60 to 70% worth of value, 22%. People who are opposed to the Alberta pension plan, 63%. Those are huge, huge numbers. And we spent $7-8 million on an advertising campaign, on an engagement campaign, on all of these things to try to convince people that this would be great when it didn't work. And it would have never worked in the first place. But again, Dani's not making decisions or governing for the 60%. She's making decisions and governing for the ones who brought her to the dance, period. And one of the problems that exists with the privatization or the profitization which is the word that I should be using, because it's not privatization as long as we're using taxpayer dollars to pay for it and paying private companies to administer it and take a little bit off the top for themselves. It's not privatization, it's profitization, because we're adding in that profit layer into a system that historically did not have it in most of the areas that Danielle Smith is trying to introduce it to. Why is this bad? Well, we know the quality of care drops off. We know the quality of services drop off. All of that stuff has been well established. We did an interview just a couple of weeks ago with a researcher who deep dived and has done several deep dives into exactly that issue. If you have $10 to spend on widgets and there's no profit margin, you get to spend all of that $10 on widgets. If you spend the same $10, but now you need to make it 20% to keep the shareholders happy, now you're only spending $8 on widgets. You're either getting less widgets or you're getting lower quality widgets. It's just math. So not only is that bad, but there's very real concerns about accountability that come into play. And this is where we're going to talk about the halal mortgages piece one more time, and then God willing, we're done with it. So for anybody who's unfamiliar, halal mortgages are mortgages that don't charge interest. They can charge fees, but interest is not in line with Islamic law or Sharia law. If you want to be good with Muslim Islamic Sharia law, then you have to follow the rules that exist within that faith. And there's nothing wrong with that, to be clear. But you can't charge interest. It's considered usury. It's not good. You can charge fees. Now, there are several private companies in Canada that do offer halal mortgages. But in the run-up to the last election, Danielle Smith was talking about it as if it absolutely wasn't a thing. And she needed to change a bunch of rules in order to make that a thing. And this is where some people started to get a little squirrely, because most financial institutions have the ability to do this if they so choose already. Again, there are products on the market that currently exist. So the fact that they currently exist tells you that they currently exist. Where people started to get squirrely, though, is Danielle Smith was also going to make some changes to the way that Alberta Treasury Branch does business. Alberta Treasury Branch is a crown corporation. And as a crown corporation and a financial institution, in the same way that companies are responsible to make sure they get that 20% of their widget money, Alberta Treasury Branch is responsible for making sure that they're getting the best possible return on investment with taxpayer dollars. And there is an argument to be made that the returns, the money that you get from the fees on the halal mortgages, there are a lot of things that it can't be invested in. Because if that money is then invested in something that is not compliant with Sharia law, it's no longer considered halal. So there are very real questions about, should Alberta Treasury Branch be involved in the business of religious loans? And I want to be very clear. This is not an Islamophobic conversation, because if the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster or any other faith said, hey, we've got this rule, we can only pay 1% interest on any loans, and that's our religious rule. So what are you going to do? People would rightfully go, whoa. That doesn't seem right. That doesn't seem like the right thing to do with taxpayer money. Now, if there was a credit union or a bank that wanted to provide only a 1% interest rate, cool. Sign me up. But the goals start to conflict. The purposes start to conflict. But it goes much deeper than that. And this is where the profitization, the bringing in of private entities into public works gets to be very problematic. Because when the halal mortgages were announced, we filed this FOIP. seeking any emails, briefing notes, and/or memos related to communications between the Treasury Board, Minister of Finance, and financial sector regulations and policy to the Alberta Treasury Branch and/or Service Credit Union in relation to the development and implementation of halal mortgages or halal financial projects. In effect, what we were asking for was, hey, if this is something that we're going to be having Alberta Treasury Branch doing with taxpayer money as a Crown corporation, we'd like to see the insides of how that came to be. We got the FOIP results, kind of. There were 728 pages of records that were pertinent. There were 728 pages of records that explained how it was, the development of halal mortgages and the changes to the Alberta Treasury Branch's rules, the laws, the legislation that oversees how the Alberta Treasury Branch operates. There were 728 pages that addressed all of that. What did we get? Nothing. In consideration of the information available and the requirements of the FOIP Act, Treasury Board and Finance has decided not to give you access to the records you requested. The records are withheld pursuant to Sections 16.1, 24.1, and 25.1 of the FOIP Act. And that's the core problem with bringing in all of these financial institutions, bringing in all of these private institutions and putting them on the public payroll in the delivery of public services. It throws up a wall. If Bob's Hospital Corp takes over the Peter Lougheed tomorrow and people want to file FOIP, I guess it's not FOIP, ATIA is what it is, Access to Information Act. We changed the name. It'll like X is Twitter. ATIA will always be FOIP to me. It throws up a wall. And because it's now a private financial organization, you can't get access to those records anymore. It is the opposite of transparency. That is what is at risk with the privatization of healthcare. Because if you want to know how many times was the emergency room at the Peter Lougheed Hospital, which is now run by Bob's Hospital Corp, how many times was it full to capacity? How many times did it have to put those special cots out that we saw in the news made of the plumbing tubing because there weren't enough beds? You won't get an answer. That's what's at stake here. Moving on from there. And this is another fun little FOIP exercise because, again, it shows how having access to this information is so important. It speaks to the government motivations potentially. It speaks to the misinformation, the disinformation, the manipulation of people. And so, yes, now we are going to talk about the book bans. But before we talk about the book bans, there's two clips, very short. I promise these are like 30 seconds at the most each, that happened just last week in the run-up to the by-elections that are happening tomorrow. Here's Danielle Smith with her two candidates for Edmonton.
That's why we're taking pornography out of the schools, if you can believe it, that they have some of these terrible images that our young kids are seeing. We think that these kinds of values are really important to have.
If you can believe it. If you can believe it. And maybe the first thing that anybody should do when they hear anybody, particularly the politicians, say, if you can believe it, is go, I don't know if I do. And we're going to get into that. But the second piece that's really important to keep in mind is that it's not just Danielle Smith talking about explicit content in schools. She's also denigrating teachers.
Even family. We believe that parents have a right to choose the education for their kids. We believe that teachers should not be getting in between that relationship between kids and their parents. We believe as well that kids should be able to be kids.
We believe that parents and teachers, the teachers shouldn't be getting in between. I don't know what kind of kung fu that is. The parents and the kids. The implication there is that parents and teachers, or parents are getting in between teachers and their kids. They're not. And B, that teachers want to get in between the relationship between parents and kids. They don't. They don't have the time. They don't have the inclination. They don't have the energy. It's just not a thing that happens. But if somebody was to say, I don't think that Danielle Smith should be running down pedestrians on the road. I just don't think that's something that should be happening. It makes it sound like that's a problem that's happening. To be clear, to the best of my knowledge, Danielle Smith is not running pedestrians down the road. It's a hyperbolic example to illustrate how stupid it is and how manipulative it is. But that brings us to the book banning, because there's some problems with the stories and there's some disingenuous communication that's been going on. One of the things that has come up is this notion that the book bans were in response to conservative activist groups saying that they gave Alberta government a list of inappropriate books in schools' libraries. Now, Nicolaides told reporters in Calgary on Monday he was alerted to the issue by a group of parents who provided him with excerpts from many of these books and other materials and showed him information suggesting they were available in different schools. So, no, it was parents. Well, two things can be true at the same time. You can be a parent and you can also be a member of a conservative advocacy group, a far-right fundamentalist Christian advocacy group. Those two things can absolutely be true at the same time. And with that in mind, there was an organization called Action for Canada who did demonstrate that they did lobby the government to have these books removed. Members of the groups Parents for Choice in Education and Action for Canada have since taken credit for supplying Nicolaides with the names of the books they wanted removed from school libraries. Nicolaides said his decision was influenced by what he'd been hearing from parents around the province. No, we've been hearing from parents, he said. I've been hearing from parents for quite some time, in fact, since I became minister, about items in school libraries that were of concern. Emails, August 25th. Okay, back up again. My notes are terrible tonight, so there's so much to talk about. So with that in mind, with Nicolaides saying that he'd been hearing from parents since he became education minister, we decided that we were going to try to take a look at what feedback did you get, Mr. Minister? So we filed a FOIP. Any emails, briefing notes, memos, and a final investigative report, if one exists, relating to claims made by Minister Nicolaides in the press conference of May 26, 2025, about graphic books, specifically but not limited to the books to Genderqueer by Maya Kobaby, Fun Home by Alison Blechtel, Blankets by Craig Thompson, and Flamer by Mike Corrado being available in elementary schools or schools where elementary school-aged children would have access to them. Please include any correspondence raising these concerns, as well as any documentation regarding the methods used to confirm or refute the existence of these books in any schools, but particularly in kindergarten or elementary schools. Where are the emails, Mr. Minister? And we got a response. And there weren't as many emails as you might think. In August of 2023, there was an email that was sent to Minister Nicolaides, who was written as a concerned Albertan who at no point in their email did they express that they were a parent. They did say that, quote, if you would like to learn more about this and other issues, specifically regarding SOGI and DEI and ARAO ideologies, talking about sexual orientation and gender identity and diversity, equity, and inclusion, I would be more than happy to have a discussion. And he included in his email a boatload of different attachments. And this is where it becomes abundantly clear who we're talking about. Because if you take a look at those attachments, it comes complete with the book, The Red Flags, and then the source at the bottom of every single page, actionforcanada.com. So, sorry, Mr. Nicolaides, Minister Nicolaides, you were getting petitioned by actionforcanada.com. And if you'd bothered to scroll to the bottom of the pages that you were apparently reading, you would have caught on to that. Another of the, I think it's 3 emails that were sent to the minister. This one was actually sent to Premier Smith with Dale Nally CC'd. I hope this email finds you well. I'm writing it to you today to address a matter of concern regarding a book displayed in the, and they've redacted, rightfully so, the elementary school library. My purpose in writing this email is to bring this issue to your attention and request your support in finding a resolution that respects the values and concerns of parents like myself. So we have us a parent here, ladies and gentlemen. Recently, I came across a book in the library bulletin board titled, "It Feels Good to Be Yourself." While I appreciate literature that encourages critical thinking and discussion, I must express my concern that this particular book delves into a sexually provocative and politically charged subject matter, which I believe is inappropriate for an elementary school environment. For your convenience, I've provided a YouTube video link and a picture of the book on the bulletin board. Now, here's the thing. That book has nothing explicit in it whatsoever. It's written for 4 to 8-year-olds. I personally flipped through the, I think, 24 pages on like Google Reads or whatever it was. There's nothing of any kind of a sexual nature. It discusses gender identity. That's it. So I suppose the only way that you could interpret a book like It Feels Good to Be Yourself with absolutely nothing explicit in it is if you viewed gender identity, and by extension, gender dysphoria, as being I want to make sure I get the wording right here, sexually provocative. It's ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous. So let's be clear. This email highlighting this particular book that was cited as one of the parents making complaints, it didn't even actually cite the other books. This is one of the books that the government provided to us as justification for hearing from parents. The Premier's office demanded that there would be a response. This was forwarded. So the original email was sent to Danielle Smith, Dale Nally. The Office of the Premier forwarded it to the Education Minister. Please determine and prepare the most appropriate ministerial response for blah, 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 and the attached correspondence on behalf of the Premier due by September 26, 2023. Another email came in. Again, this one is arguably parenty. It's a grandfather who sent this email. This was on September 26, 2023. We are now up to a grand total of 3 emails for anyone playing the home game. Good evening. My name is blank. I am a father and a grandfather living in Airdrie, Alberta. Earlier this month, blank, her mother shared with me information related to the sexual education that will be taught to grade 4 students this year. Frankly, I was quite disturbed by what I saw and started doing some research. What I found is that Alberta education has gone full bore to embed the sexual orientation and gender identity ideology in the school curriculum from grades 4 to 12. This ideology is typically referred to as SOGI. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I understand that the SOGI curriculum had its origins in the LGBTQ. Oh, we left a letter out. I wonder if it was on purpose. Community, as it also includes discussions of diversity and inclusion. My issue is not with the LGBTQ. Oh, we left a letter out again. Community. While I cannot speak for them, I'm fairly certain that they do not want their children subjected to the topics that I have identified. Further in my research, I identified a number of books that, to my understanding, are being used as reference books for the teachers or are recommended reading for the students. I've also included a partial list of these books. All of these are available through the Airdrie Public Library. So I suspect they are also available in school libraries. So our third email isn't even going after school libraries. It's going after curriculum and it's going after public libraries. He then includes a list of a number of books, most of which have to do with LGBTQ2S+. So again, right out of the gates, we've got a little bit of a pattern emerging here. We have 3 whole emails, and we have nothing substantive. We have 1 parent, and we've identified a couple of books. That's it. Let's go to July of 2024. This is an email that was addressed to the Office of the Premier, Minister of Education, and the Airdrie East Assembly. To Premier Smith, Minister Nicolaides, Representative Angela Pitt. Let me begin by saying straight out how absolutely elated I was on February 1st of this year when Danielle announced her new policies regarding puberty blockers, hormone treatments, top and bottom surgeries. Again, bottom surgeries were never happening under the age of 18, parental consent, and opting in for classes about gender ideology and sexual orientation. I couldn't scream my support loud enough for everything she has addressed. Just as important as those matters, Danielle also promised there would be a review of all resource materials being used for their age appropriateness. Seems to reference his earlier email. So we have another email from the same person where I pointed out extensive resource materials that are still being used in human sexuality education from grade 4 to grade 7, inclusive, that without a doubt are inappropriate for the age of students being taught. Minister Nicolaides may have found a copy of that presentation in his emails as I copied his office on all of my materials. Goes on to list off some of his concerns. The sexuality wheel. It's perfectly normal. Changing bodies, growing up, sex, gender, and sexual health. A video shown in grade 6 entitled Understanding Consent, as if teaching kids about consent in any context is a bad thing. The aim of these materials is to encourage students to become sexually active by the time they are 12 years old, and they are plainly encouraged to do so in the Understanding Consent video. It's just, no, not a thing. Besides the resource it's perfectly normal mentioned earlier, I also identified a number of books available in the school libraries that, in my opinion, border on child pornography and should not be available to any minor under the age of 16 years old. Yet a great many of these books are found in school libraries, in elementary schools, grade 1 to 8, and middle schools, grade 5 to 8. You'll find a list of books deemed age inappropriate by this grandparent, not by any governing body, not by any group of librarians, by this grandparent, with specific references to illustrations and texts in those books that will shock you. Unfortunately, all of these books are also found on the open shelves of our public libraries, which is a whole other challenge. I do hope you'll find my input as well as my list of books helpful as you review the reference materials prior to the start of the new school year. And then we had another list of very well formatted books that are considered to be bad. My Shadow is Pink is a bad book. My Shadow is Purple is a bad book. It's Perfectly Normal is considered a bad book. All Boys Aren't Blue, a bad book. Again, there's a reoccurring theme that's going on here. Now, this is where I have to give Nicolaides a little bit of credit, because he did send a reply where he said, thanks so much for your email, which you also sent to Honorable Premier Danielle Smith. Everybody else, appreciate you sharing your feedback regarding library materials in schools and the policies Alberta government will be introducing to ensure our children are supporting as they mature and become able to make important adult decisions in your life. And then he goes on to say in that email, look, we set the curriculum, but it's up to teachers and the resources that are provided to determine what's appropriate. They have to use age appropriate stuff. So it's basically a pump the brakes email. Now that email was sent July 30th, 2024. But something changed in November, because James Johnson, who is the chief of staff to the Ministry of Education, forwarded a Twitter link to a staffer asking them to apparently reference an organization to measure up. Can we see which books are banned the most and see if they're in ours where appropriate? And if you click on the Twitter link, that takes you to this Mindshift account. And that takes you to an SLJ.com story. And it's a website and a story about how book banning is bad. That's literally what it is. The whole thing talks about how horrifying it is that the books are being banned at the rate that they're being in the United States, and how it's mismatched with freedom of speech, how it's mismatched with the principles of what's supposed to happen, and often how those books are being banned, not because there's anything age inappropriate in them or that they're being presented to kids who it's not age appropriate for, but because they deal specifically with LGBTQ2S plus issues. The response, I wish I was making this up, the response that we were provided in the FOIP document. As you'll see below, most of the novels, we've now switched to the Austin list, are found in CBE and EPSB schools. Only 16% of books banned in Austin weren't found in EPSB, and roughly 19% weren't found in CBE. And then it provides a list which includes Batman and The Walking Dead. These are books that have been banned. This Austin list is a list of books that have been banned, that has been tracked by the Austin Public Library. Let's take a second to just read what they have to say. As librarians, we follow the American Library Association's Code of Ethics, which most clearly states that libraries uphold the principles of intellectual freedom and resist all efforts to censor library resources. Every year, however, libraries across America are challenged by well-intended people who personally object to the material available in the public. In recent years, attempted censorship has been on the rise. For example, Texas State Senator Matt Cruz published a list of 850 books he wants removed from all Texas public schools. Many schools have preemptively removed these books while formal decisions are being made. All is not lost, however. Many public libraries vehemently work against censorship, and the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund has great resources and assistance for those of us who aim to keep these books on the shelves. So prithee, prithee, I love it. Check out these graphic novels and see what all the fuss is about. So the Austin list is a list of books that librarians believe should not be banned. That's what the Austin list is. And that's the list that the government of Alberta chose to reference to determine how they were doing in the banning of the books. And we also got, with all of this, a list of the 4 books that are in the release from the government. Those 4 books are Flamer, Fun Home, Blankets, and Genderqueer. There was a April 30th collection of screen grabs. This appears to be the full depth and breadth of research that was done. It doesn't appear, we were not provided any copies of any emails to either of the school boards saying, hey, we have some questions about some of these books and which shelves they're on. Could you provide us some information and context? There's none of that in the FOIP. And the FOIP was pretty clear what we were looking for. There's no efforts to reach out to publishers that is included in the FOIP. There's no efforts to speak to the authors. There's no efforts to speak to curriculum designers, pedagogy experts, child psychologists. There's none of that in this FOIP. All it is a series of screen grabs from a certain number of schools. Now, we're not going to name the schools, but given the wording that the government used in regards to its banning of these books, or looking at the potential banning of these books, where they said these books were available to K through 9 students. There's some critical context that we wanted to talk about with each of the books. Flamer, which is a book that has, it deals with some very heavy issues that are absolutely relevant to kids 14 and up, especially kids who are LGBTQ2S+, who are 14 and up. The book itself is rated for 14 and up. Was found from the release from the government, it was found in Edmonton in 2 K through 9 schools. So it is in the library of 2 K through 9 schools. Now, there's an important piece that we're going to talk about in a sec there. 1 4 to 9 school, 1 7 to 9 school, and 4 10 to 12 schools. Now, I'm going to run through the rest of the list just so I can be thorough, and then we'll talk about it. Fun Home, which is related for kids 15 up, it is available in 1 K through 12 school. Now, I'm not going to say the name of the school because I don't want anybody to have crazy people show up with signs in front of their school. It's a very, very specialized school. And it shouldn't come as a surprise that for a book that is recommended for kids 15 and up, as many books are, that it would be present in a school that has kids, 15, by the way, being grade 9 and 10, from K through 12. It has 1 7 through 12 school and 6 10 through 12 schools. Blankets, which is rated 16 plus, is in that same K through 12 school, which is, again, a very, very specialized school. 2 7 to 9 schools, 1 8 to 12 school, and 6 10 to 12 schools. The only results for genderqueer that were provided in the initial search, which is 14 plus, was 1 K through 9 school, 1 5 through 9 school, 5 10 through 12 schools. They repeated the search on May 26th. And they did it in both cities for most of them. And the numbers are largely the same. Now, immediately after the presser, another search was conducted of the Edmonton public school system, and it appears that all of those books had been removed from the online system. So as that article from the Austin Library, the commentary that they provided, where many schools have had to remove these books while official decisions get made, it makes sense that they would be removed. But when we're talking about some of these books being available, should books that are not age appropriate for kids in grade 9 not be in schools for kids in grade 9? And this is where the function of librarians starts to kick in. Because we've talked to a few folks. We've done some informal polling. Kids aren't allowed in a library unless there's an adult there. In most elementary schools, kids aren't allowed to even go to the library unless they're being actively supervised. So the notion that kindergarten kids are somehow getting access to these books and then checking them out is disingenuous and dishonest, because there are safeguards that exist to make sure that these books are only being seen by kids that it's age appropriate for. And when we take a look at the schools that they're in, they're all in schools that it's age appropriate for. Saying that a kid who attends a K through 12 school at a grade 11 level should not be able to access books that are appropriate for their grade 11 reading level and comprehension level is bonkers. If you want to pick a problem with this whole thing, the argument here is that, well, should we be having K through 9 schools? Should we be having schools where we have that diverse of an age group of students all in one place? Totally separate argument. But the notion that we shouldn't be allowing kids in grade 9 to access grade 9 appropriate reading materials because the younger kids might find it is just disingenuous. And it's especially disingenuous when you take a look at what is in all of those same libraries that nobody is losing their minds over. Anybody who has read the book Stephen King's It knows there's some things in that book that are of not a dissimilar vein from what we're talking about with some of the stuff that's in these books. What about Carrie? Carrie is a book that in both Calgary and Edmonton is available in some of these K through 12 schools, in some of these K through 9 schools. What about The Handmaid's Tale? Again, also available in all of these schools. And I'm not making the argument that any of these books being in any of these schools is a bad thing. I'm making the argument that it's a good thing and that there are safeguards in place to make sure that young kids aren't picking up these books. Oh, but Nate, you'll say, those are all, they don't have graphic pictures in those books. Those are all just words. They're not nearly as disruptive. Oh, wait, there is a graphic novel version of The Handmaid's Tale. Huh. That graphic novel version is available in a lot of these same schools. So again, what this is really about becomes very, very clear. This is the religious right, the afraid, the insecure, the uncomfortable, trying to make sure that their worldview is enforced on all of the kids in all of the schools and the public libraries and the sex ed curriculum that parents now have to opt into. And just yesterday, it was announced that there are changes coming. This did work. Nicolaides will be bringing in new rules for explicit books, whatever that means. And this comes after the government releases its, maybe they massage the survey a little bit. We'll go through some of the results. You can judge for yourself. So to start with, one of the questions that the big survey asked was, at what age should children be able to access materials with sexually explicit content in school libraries? There's a bunch of different ways to read this stat. 23% say high school, 22% say middle school, 17% say all ages, 4% say elementary school 12 and under. Another 34% say never. What does the survey interpret it for the reader? 34% of respondents said children should never be able to access sexually explicit content in school libraries. 24% said age 15 and up. Well, that's 23% said age 15 and up. That's not entirely true, is it? Because if 17% believe in all ages and 22% believe in middle school and 4% believe in elementary school, I got to say, I disagree with that 4%. And 23%, that means 66% believe that over the age of 15, which is what the average age for these books is listed as, should be able to access these books. Parents of school-age children were most supportive of children never being able to access these materials in school. But again, that is only if we look at the never. If we add up all of the other things, which would be ages 15 and up, that is still 58%. So we're torquing the numbers right out of the gates. Who decides what the appropriateness of the materials should be? They torque those numbers as well. Who do you think should decide what materials are age appropriate in school libraries? The most common response was librarians at 23%. Students at 8%, teachers at 20%, school boards at 13%, and school administrators at 13%. And this is where the problems in the survey become a little bit self-evident, because in this question, only 19% say parents, which means 81% don't think that the parents should be the deciding factor in what stuff comes forward. How supportive of you of the government of Alberta setting consistent requirements for school boards and how they select and manage school library materials? The overwhelming majority was not supportive in all categories, whether we're talking about parents, parents who don't have kids in school, parents who do have kids in school, teachers, school administrators, school or public librarians, even the interested Albertans say no. Parental involvement in assessing the appropriate materials. 62% of respondents either agree or strongly agree that parents and guardians should play a role in reporting or challenging the availability of materials with sexually explicit content in school libraries. But again, that's a very, very hard one to juxtapose with who should decide what materials are age appropriate. Because on that question, it was only 19% in parents. So right out of the gates, it becomes very, very clear that this is a deeply emotional conversation. And deeply emotional conversations should be had on the basis of facts. Should parental consent be required for children to access materials with sexually explicit content in school libraries, regardless of age? 34% say yes. 34% of parents apparently say that they believe that they should have full control over what their kids read, which is a startling number. But again, and we did a deep dive on the 4 books involved in this debacle 2 weeks ago. And it is a nuanced conversation. And it is an important conversation. And when we have government torquing the interpretation of their survey results, it's not a great look. And when we have the government ministers and government staffers misrepresenting what's in these books and who it's being presented to, and diminishing the roles that teachers and librarians play in making sure that in schools where you have kids that have that diverse of a grade range, that these books are not ending up in front of kids that it's not inappropriate for. One of the questions that wasn't on the survey is, do you have faith and confidence in the teachers and the librarians who serve you in your schools, who serve your kids in your schools, to make sure that this content doesn't get in front of kids that it's inappropriate? That question wasn't on the survey. Because again, we're dealing with the land of presupposed outcomes. Moving on from there. We got one last topic, and then we're at the finish line. Thank you all so much for sticking around as long as you have. I promise this one is fun because we're going back to payroll. We got to talk about the payroll again because, and we did a deep dive on this a couple weeks ago, where we kind of worked through the process of a FOIP result that we had gotten that made it very, very clear. It seemed to. We wanted to make sure who made the decision to order what in the way that it was ordered. Yeah, I'm not going to go through the whole thing right now because we're coming up to the 2-hour mark, but there are some pieces that are really, really important that we want to highlight. To start with, we got to talk about the ministerial directive that was issued by Jason Copping on December 1st. And this is the ministerial directive that authorized AHS to spend the money on the Turkish acetaminophen, the acetaminophen and ibuprofen. It's not Tylenol. It's payroll. But it's not Tylenol. This is the ministerial directive that authorized that to happen. Alberta Health Services shall take all necessary steps to procure on an expedited basis the following pharmaceuticals impacted by national shortages: acetaminophen, oral liquid, 80 milligrams per milliliter or 32 milligrams per milliliter. Ibuprofen, oral liquid, 40 milligrams per milliliter. This was explicitly stated. The concentrations that were to be ordered was explicitly stated in the ministerial directive. It's right there. There's no room for interpretation here. But we found out through our previous FOIP that somewhere along the line, an individual named Jitendra Prasad appears to have made his own choices, where he talked about the manufacturers applied to Health Canada for approval over the weekend for 2 strengths of acetaminophen and 1 strength of ibuprofen suspension. The 2 strengths of acetaminophen that they have applied for are 24 milligrams per milliliter and 32 milligrams per milliliter. The reason that the 2 strengths is the 24 milligram per milliliter strength is what is predominantly sold in international markets, and the manufacturer has export authorization from the Turkish regulators, so it can be received in Canada faster. The strength is the same as what Health Canada has imported from Australia. That was only for hospital use, and that was branded Tylenol. They will switch to the 32 milligrams per milliliter once approval is received. But then we have the purchase order. And the purchase order was issued to MH Care on December 9th of 2022. And it makes it very, very clear on the purchase order, there were 4 million bottles of acetaminophen, 24 milligram oral suspension, 150 milliliter alcohol-free. There's no mention of the second concentration that was alluded to stated in the email from Mr. Prasad. The ibuprofen was 20 milligrams per milliliter. Again, not what the ministerial directive stated. There's the comparison. 80 milligrams per milliliter, 32 milligrams per milliliter. They ordered 24 milligrams per milliliter. Ibuprofen oral liquid, 40 milligrams per milliliter. They ordered 20 milligrams per milliliter. And it was because of those differing concentrations that all of the special steps had to be taken at pharmacies, where in order for a parent to buy either of the medications, they had to go through the mini training class with a pharmacist because the concentrations were such a departure. Mr. Prasad seemed to offer a compelling argument for why there was going to be that initial order, but there's nothing in the purchase order, which is the only purchasing information that was put forward, that says, and then we'll switch. It's the straight up 70 million. Here's what we're going to do. So we wanted to make sure, we wanted to know, because it appears on the basis of all of the FOIPs that we've done to this point, that Jitendra Prasad made the decision, it appears that way, to override the ministerial directive. And we've spoken to a couple of different ministers, former ministers, in a couple of different portfolios, and said, what would it take to override a ministerial directive? And every single person who's been a minister of the crown has said, you don't do that. You can't do that. I would have your job. It's a ministerial directive. If I've said XYZ is what I want to have happen, XYZ has to be what happens. It's in the directive. You can't have people just taking free interpretation of what the ministerial directives are. Okay, reasonable. So is it possible then that maybe Copping revised? Maybe he issued an updated ministerial directive that nobody's heard about. And maybe this is all just a big miscommunication. So we filed another FOIP. I'm seeking all records related to any decisions or direction from the then Minister of Health, Jason Copping, regarding the specific concentrations of children medication to be procured between the ministerial directive. And we put the name of the number, the file finger, 20D4-2022, on December 1st, 2022, and December 12th, 2022, bearing in mind that the order was placed on December 9th. We figured we'd give it a little bit of buffer just in case, the weekend or whatever. Because we wanted to know, was there a change to the ministerial directive? Or did somebody paint outside of the lines with $70 million of taxpayers' money? Here's the result that we got. Primary and Preventative Health Services conducted a thorough research for records and found no responsive records related to the subject matter you requested. There's no records of Jason Copping ever saying, nah, it's cool, order the different concentration. So that's a new piece of the puzzle, I guess. And this is without even the 900-page FOIP that I have to kill a small forest to print off. And that's it. Folks, you made it. Thank you so much. We're just past the 2-hour mark. I want to talk about some things in advance, though, because our Patreon sponsors already know. But we've got an episode coming for next weekend. And it is, I've done a lot of episodes. It's been 6.5 years that I've been doing this show. And there's been a lot of episodes that have meant a lot. There's been a lot of episodes where people have demonstrated a significant amount of trust. There's been a lot of conversations that have been deeply emotional, deeply raw, deeply vulnerable. They all mean a tremendous amount to me. And I don't want what I'm about to say, I don't want anybody who's participated in any of those episodes to feel like what I'm about to say in any way diminishes those conversations, because it doesn't. Those conversations will forever be a part of me. I did, however, have my Mount Everest. I had my big wish that I wanted to try to find a way to have a conversation with a very specific individual, because I knew that it was going to be a massive conversation. And I have been trying to find the pathway in to have this conversation. And in a weird way, I owe Danielle Smith a thank you for disrespecting the First Nations chiefs, elected chiefs, as much as she has over the last couple of months, particularly with some of the bills that she's introduced without any consultation, because it opened the door for me to have this conversation with this person. And so next weekend, I am so excited to be able to say the conversation that we're having for our Canada Day episode is so important. That conversation that we're going to present means so much to me. I really can't overstate it, and I really, really hope that you enjoy it as much as I did having the conversation. You'll get to see me fanboy, which is not something I do very often. But boy, did I fanboy hard. So next Sunday, it's a very, very special episode of The Breakdown. I'm not going to say too much more. Our patron sponsors already know what it is, and I've gotten some good feedback on it, so thank you for that. But for those of you who aren't patron sponsors, that's okay. I get it. Not everybody has money. So worth it. I'm so excited for it. So look forward to that on Sunday, and please give it. I know. Oh, but please listen to this episode. It's really important. But this one, I beg all of you to listen to it with an open heart, because it's such a amazing conversation. And that's what I'm going to say. That's what I'm going to leave it at. And now I'll do all the plugs. So all of that being said, if you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here at The Breakdown, and you'd like to get early access to our interview episodes and on an ongoing basis our Cole posts, then you can sign up to be one of our Patreon supporters at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab, where for just the price of a fancy cup of coffee, you can help us file the FOIPS and do the things. And we're going to do it. We got some events planned for the summer. We're just trying to find venues. If we can find good venues in Calgary and Edmonton, we're going to do live versions of The Breakdown in August. We have the dates chosen. We're working on the guests. Just need the appropriately sized spaces. So keep an eye out for that. All of that is possible because of the support that we get from our Patreon folks. Now, all of that being said, if you're not somebody who's in a position to sign up for a monthly thing, or it's just not your thing, you're not looking for a long-term commitment, then you can also send us an e-transfer at info@thebreakdownab.ca. And that will help us continue to do what it is that we're doing here. And I think that's about all that I have. So I want to say a huge thank you to our Patreon supporters. I want to say huge thank you for everybody who's in the chat. Y'all were super. I literally just hopped over to the chat, and the first one that I see is Nate. I thought you said you were going to make shorter pods. It's been 2 weeks, and Danielle Smith continues to light the province on fire. There's so much to do. But thank you so much to the chat. The interactions that go on there are constantly positive, and the little community that we built there just means the world to me. So thank you everyone so much for being in there. If you're listening to the audio version of the podcast, please do the star thing with the reviews. If you're watching on the YouTubes, the like and subscribe, smash those buttons, as the kids say. And I think that's it. So it is our first live show back in a little while, and I would not leave without doing this first.
How's your BS detector evolved over time?
I tend to be pretty trusting.
I'm not like I'm certain that there are people out there who think that I'm like fake laughing at this point now, because it's been like, I don't know, 2 or 3 years of playing that clip and laughing at it every time. I'm not. That clip just fills my heart with joy. Thank you so much, everybody. We will see you for our Canada Day special next weekend, we'll probably do some things for the by-election because there's a by-election too. We got to have a conversation about what's going on with the NDP because I don't know what's going on with the comms there. Oh, it's not good. So we'll see how that plays out after the by-election, and we'll see you for a Canada Day special, and we'll be back in 2 weeks for another live episode. In the meantime, and in between time, as always, take care of each other and keep the conversation going.